Some days begin just like any other, but fate has a way of turning the ordinary into something unforgettable. On a bright afternoon in New York City, where Fifth Avenue gleamed under the sunlight, an encounter was about to take place, one that would leave an indelible mark among the streams of people moving with purpose. A seemingly unremarkable elderly woman stepped into Lancaster and Hayes Fine Jewelry, a boutique renowned for its exclusivity. Her presence in this realm of opulence was unexpected, her modest attire clashing with the extravagant displays of wealth surrounding her. To the sharp-eyed sales associates, she was an anomaly, someone who didn't belong, but what they didn't know was that this woman carried a story that would shake their assumptions to the core. And in just a few minutes, arrogance would lead to a moment of reckoning, one that would prove that appearances can be deceiving, because sometimes, karma doesn't arrive with a whisper. It comes roaring in, wearing a leather jacket and carrying a truth that no price tag can match. A quiet intruder in a world of wealth on this bustling stretch of Fifth Avenue, where high-end brands and gleaming storefronts attracted the city's elite. Eleanor Carter walked with quiet confidence. At 74, she moved at a measured pace, her expression serene as she took in the grandeur surrounding her. Her outfit was simple but well-kept, a floral dress and a classic leather handbag, worn yet elegant. Stopping in front of Lancaster and Hayes, she let her gaze travel over the glittering display of diamonds and sapphires behind the thick glass. She hesitated only for a moment before taking a deep breath and pushing open the heavy glass door. A soft chime announced her entrance. The store was an oasis of refinement, plush carpets absorbed every footstep, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over meticulously arranged jewelry, and the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume lingered in the air. It was the kind of place where a glance could determine whether someone was worthy of service or merely a distraction. From across the boutique, a man in a navy blue suit took notice. The salesman's judgment. Nathan Sterling was a senior associate at Lancaster and Hayes, known for his ability to close high-value sales and his unspoken talent for sizing up clientele. One glance at Eleanor, and his instincts kicked in. The faded handbag, the unbranded dress, it all suggested that she was not the kind of customer who would make his time worthwhile. He exchanged a knowing look with a fellow associate, who gave a subtle shake of her head before returning to adjusting a display of diamond necklaces. Nathan, ever the professional, still approached with a carefully measured smile, polite, yet distant. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How may I assist you today?" Eleanor met his gaze with a warmth that was met with thinly veiled indifference. "I'm looking for a special gift," she said. "Perhaps a pair of sapphire earrings?" Nathan's expression barely shifted, but there was a flicker of doubt behind his eyes. "Sapphire earrings," he echoed, as if the idea itself was implausible. "Of course. We do have a few options." He led her to a glass counter, though his movements lacked the usual enthusiasm he reserved for high-profile clients. Reaching beneath the glass, he selected a pair of stunning sapphire earrings and placed them on the velvet display pad. "Here you are, ma'am. These are quite exquisite." His voice carried a restrained patience, the tone of someone humoring an unlikely buyer. Eleanor reached out, gently picking up one earring to examine the craftsmanship. Nathan watched her closely, arms crossed, his watch catching the light. "Please handle them carefully," he added, the warning subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor turned the earring in her fingers, admiring its deep blue hue. "They truly are beautiful," she murmured. Nathan gave a small chuckle, one devoid of warmth. "Well, beauty often comes with a price," he said smoothly. "These are not exactly the sort of thing one picks up for casual wear." His gaze flicked over her attire, his unspoken judgment hanging in the air. "Perhaps I can show you something more suitable?" Eleanor's eyes remained steady, unfazed. "I'd still like to try them on properly." Nathan's professional facade cracked ever so slightly. His smile thinned. "Let me be direct, ma'am, since you seem to have misunderstood. These earrings are valued at $30,000. He enunciated the number carefully, as though it might discourage her from further inquiry. "That's more than your—" He stopped himself, glancing at her well-worn handbag. "Let's just say they're beyond what most people would consider an impulse purchase." Several customers nearby grew visibly uncomfortable. A younger associate, Oliver, busied himself at the opposite counter, though he was clearly listening. Eleanor remained composed. "I've worked with fine jewelry for years," she said simply. Nathan's brows lifted. "Oh? Perhaps in a costume department?" His smirk widened as he cast a quick glance at a wealthy couple who had been pretending not to listen. His words were meant to be cutting, but Eleanor's expression remained unchanged. "I still think I'd like to try them on," she repeated. Unfazed, Nathan let out a short breath, his patience thinning. "Ma'am, let's be realistic. These pieces are exclusive. Not everyone is suited for them." He straightened his blazer, his tone carrying the unmistakable weight of dismissal. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable browsing a store with, shall we say, more accessible options?" Eleanor slowly placed the earring back on the velvet pad. She moved with grace, unhurried, as though she had all the time in the world, and then, just as Nathan was about to close the display case, the store's front doors swung open, the sound of a motorcycle engine rumbled through the boutique, breaking the charged silence. A tall figure strode in, the scent of leather and the crisp autumn air clinging to him. A helmet hung loosely under one arm, and his aviator sunglasses reflected the store's warm lighting. Nathan's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. His posture straightened, his polished salesman's smile returning at full force. "Mr. Cruz," he said, his voice bright with enthusiasm. "What an unexpected pleasure." But Tom Cruise wasn't looking at him, his eyes immediately found Eleanor, and the warmth in his gaze was undeniable. "Mom," he said with an easy smile, crossing the room to embrace her. "Sorry I'm late, traffic was brutal." The store fell into stunned silence. Nathan's complexion paled as the weight of his mistake came crashing down on him. Eleanor Carter was not just another elderly woman browsing jewelry she couldn't afford, she was Tom Cruise's mother, and in that moment, Nathan Sterling realized that the true price of arrogance could never be measured in dollars. The revelation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Nathan felt as though the ground beneath him had vanished, leaving him to dangle in the embarrassment of his own assumptions. The wealthy couple who had observed the earlier exchange now found the diamonds they were inspecting far less captivating. "It's all right, dear," Eleanor said, her voice steady and dignified, as she gently patted her son's arm. "This young man was just explaining to me the importance of knowing one's place." Tom's smile faded slightly, replaced by a calm, measured expression. His eyes, however, darkened with a weight that made Nathan involuntarily step back. Was he now? Tom's voice was low but carried through the hushed boutique with the authority of someone who was used to commanding a room. "And what place would that be?" Nathan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His carefully crafted words failed him as beads of sweat began to form along his hairline. Despite the boutique's meticulously maintained climate control, I had no idea, Nathan stammered, his voice a whisper of its former confidence. "Mr. Cruz, if I had known." "That's exactly the point," Tom interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "You didn't know. You didn't know she spent years designing costumes for some of Hollywood's most iconic films. You didn't know she raised me on her own, teaching me to respect everyone I meet." Tom took a step closer, his presence alone causing Nathan to shrink back even further. "You knew nothing about her, but you decided she didn't belong here. That's on you." The boutique remained silent, the other customers pretending to admire jewelry while stealing glances at the unfolding scene. The young associate, Oliver, stepped forward, his face a mixture of sympathy and professionalism. "Mrs. Carter," Oliver said with genuine warmth, "if you're still interested, I'd be honored to show you our entire sapphire collection. We have some pieces that would complement your eyes beautifully." Nathan shot Oliver a withering look, but Tom nodded approvingly at the young associate's gesture. Eleanor, however, gently squeezed her son's arm. "Actually, darling," she said softly, "I think I've seen enough jewelry for today. How about we grab a coffee at that little cafe on the corner?" Tom's face lit up with a genuine smile. "Of course, Mom. Do they still have your favorite lemon scones?" As they turned to leave, Tom paused at the door and glanced back at Nathan, who was now attempting to blend into the background of his own store. "You know," Tom said, his voice clear and steady, "the true value of something isn't always about how much it shines or how much it costs. Sometimes, it's about character, dignity, and how you treat people. My mom taught me that." With that, the security door buzzed one final time as Tom and Eleanor exited, leaving behind a silence more profound than any lecture. The ticking of Nathan's expensive watch felt like a countdown to the inevitable conversation he would soon have with his manager. The store manager, Mr. Collins, who had emerged from his office during the commotion, cleared his throat and fixed Nathan with a look of profound disappointment. "Nathan, my office. Now." Oliver watched through the window as Tom helped his mother onto the back of his motorcycle, handing her an extra helmet with the care of a devoted son. Though he couldn't hear their laughter from inside, the joy on their faces spoke volumes. Turning back to the store, Oliver noticed the wealthy couple quietly setting down the pieces they had been considering. Their expressions were thoughtful, as though re-evaluating what truly mattered. Sometimes, Oliver mused, the most valuable lessons in life don't come in velvet boxes tied with satin ribbons. Back inside, Nathan sat stiffly across from Mr. Collins, the weight of his actions pressing heavily upon him. You know, Nathan, Mr. Collins began, his voice calm but firm, when you started here, I saw potential in you. But today, you showed me a side of you that doesn't belong in this store or in any place where people expect to be treated with respect. Nathan opened his mouth to protest, but Mr. Collins raised a hand to silence him. Save it. What you did wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a failure of character. And that's not something we can overlook. Meanwhile, back on the sales floor, Oliver continued assisting customers with genuine enthusiasm. The wealthy couple returned, the man offering a light-hearted question to break the lingering tension. So, how long have you worked here? He asked. Oliver smiled. Long enough to know that people matter more than price tags. The woman nodded thoughtfully. After today, I think we'll be rethinking what really matters too. They left the store hand in hand, their luxury purchases forgotten, but their hearts a little lighter. Outside, Tom and Eleanor settled into the cozy cafe she'd mentioned, the aroma of fresh coffee and lemon scones wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. As they sipped their drinks, Eleanor gave her son a playful glance. You know, she said with a teasing smile, you caused quite the scene back there. Tom chuckled, squeezing her hand gently. Sometimes, Mom, a scene is exactly what people need to wake up. She shook her head, a soft sigh escaping her lips, but her eyes sparkled with pride. I just hope he learned something from it. Tom shrugged. If he didn't learn today, life will teach him eventually. But what matters is that you were treated with the respect you deserve. Eleanor gazed out the window, her heart warmed not just by the gesture, but by the lesson that moment had imparted to everyone who witnessed it, because sometimes, the real shine isn't in what glitters, but in how we choose to brighten the world around us. As the afternoon sun dipped lower over Fifth Avenue, casting long shadows across the bustling street, the atmosphere inside Lancaster and Hayes remained heavy. The other sales associates exchanged uneasy glances, their usual polished confidence dulled by the incident that had just unfolded. The boutique, once a sanctuary of luxury and pride, now felt like a stage where a painful lesson had been delivered. Nathan sat in Mr. Collins' office, the walls closing in around him. The once imposing glass displays outside the door now seemed like barriers separating him from the world he'd taken for granted. He could hear the faint hum of conversation in the showroom, but his mind replayed every word Tom Cruise had spoken, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. Nathan, Mr. Collins' voice broke through the silence, calm but resolute. Do you understand the gravity of what just happened? Nathan swallowed hard, his throat dry. I do, he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Mr. Collins leaned forward, his elbows resting on the sleek mahogany desk. It's not just about who she was. It's about how you treated her, assuming her worth based on appearances. That's not what this store represents, and it's certainly not what I expect from my team. Nathan opened his mouth to defend himself, to explain, but the weight of his actions silenced him. For once, he had no clever retort, no smooth explanation to cover his mistake. You'll take a leave of absence, Mr. Collins continued, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. During that time, I suggest you reflect on what it means to offer true service. If you can't find that understanding, you won't have a place here when you return. The word struck Nathan harder than any dismissal. The boutique wasn't just his job, it was his identity. But now, even that felt fragile. Meanwhile, across the street at the quaint cafe, Tom and Eleanor savored the simple pleasure of their coffee and scones. The cozy atmosphere buzzed with soft chatter, the clinking of cups, and the occasional burst of laughter from nearby tables. But for Eleanor, the warmth came not just from the hot tea in her hands, but from the pride swelling in her heart. You've always had a knack for making an entrance, Eleanor teased, her eyes twinkling as she took a bite of her lemon scone. Tom chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Well, you taught me that sometimes, people need a little nudge to see the world differently. Eleanor smiled, her thoughts drifting back to the boutique. Do you think that young man will change? Tom's gaze softened as he stirred his coffee. I hope so. But even if he doesn't, the people who saw what happened, Oliver, that couple, the other customers, they'll remember. Sometimes, that's enough to start a ripple. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city move around them. Life, with all its noise and chaos, continued unabated. But for Eleanor, something profound had shifted. It wasn't just about the humiliation she'd faced, it was about the reminder that kindness and respect could shine brighter than any gemstone. "Thank you, Tom," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "For what?" he asked, his brow furrowed in gentle confusion. "For being the man I always hoped you'd become." Tom reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "That's because I had the best teacher." Back at Lancaster and Hayes, Oliver stood behind the counter, rearranging a display of sapphire rings. The store felt different now, quieter, as if the walls themselves were processing what had happened. The wealthy couple who had left earlier without their purchases had been replaced by new customers, but the lingering lesson remained in the air. Oliver glanced toward Nathan's empty station, then back at the sapphire collection. He smiled to himself, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about selling jewelry, it was about honoring the stories behind every person who walked through the door, and sometimes, the most valuable thing you could offer wasn't a necklace or a ring, it was respect. Days passed, but the impact of that afternoon at Lancaster and Hayes didn't fade. Word of the incident spread quietly but steadily through the boutique's elite clientele. The wealthy couple who had witnessed everything shared the story with their circle, and soon, what had started as a simple misunderstanding became a lesson whispered through New York's high society. Nathan's absence from the store was palpable. His polished demeanor and confident sales tactics had always been a staple at Lancaster and Hayes, but now, the boutique felt lighter without the weight of his judgmental presence. Oliver, on the other hand, flourished in the new atmosphere. Customers gravitated toward his genuine approach, appreciating the warmth and authenticity he brought to every interaction point. One morning, as Oliver was arranging a new display of emerald pendants, Mr. Collins approached him, his expression thoughtful. "Oliver," he began, "I've been watching how you've handled things since that day. Your integrity hasn't gone unnoticed." Oliver straightened, a mix of surprise and pride washing over him. "Thank you, sir. I just believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, no matter what they look like." Mr. Collins nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "That's exactly the attitude we need here. I'd like to offer you a promotion, senior associate." Oliver's eyes widened. "Wow, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Mr. Collins chuckled. "You've earned it." As Oliver accepted the offer, the boutique doors chimed open. A familiar figure stepped inside, her presence bringing a hush over the room. Eleanor Carter walked in with the same grace and quiet confidence she had displayed days before, but this time, there was a subtle shift in how the staff perceived her. Oliver approached her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Carter, it's wonderful to see you again." Eleanor returned the smile, her eyes twinkling. "Hello, Oliver. I was just passing by and thought I'd stop in. No shopping today, just wanted to say thank you." Oliver's smile deepened. "It's our pleasure, Mrs. Carter. You've reminded all of us of something very important." As they exchanged a few more words, the other associates watched, taking silent notes on how to approach their clients, not just with professionalism, but with heart. Meanwhile, across town, Nathan sat in a small coffee shop, staring into his untouched espresso. The days away from the boutique had given him plenty of time to reflect, but the mirror he faced in his mind was not flattering. The words Tom Cruise had spoken echoed in his head, challenging the very foundation of how he viewed the world. For the first time in years, Nathan felt vulnerable, stripped of the superficial armor he had built around himself through luxury and status. He realized how shallow his judgments had been, how many people he might have dismissed simply because they didn't fit the mold he believed mattered. With a deep sigh, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Mr. Collins's number. His thumb hovered over the call button before he finally pressed it. "Mr. Collins," Nathan began when the call connected, his voice more humble than it had ever been. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I know I have a lot to learn, but if there's any chance for me to come back, even in a different role, I'd like the opportunity to prove I've changed." There was a pause on the other end before Mr. Collins responded, his tone measured but not unkind. "Nathan, growth starts with acknowledgement. Let's talk next week." Back at the cafe, Tom and Eleanor had made visiting their little corner of solace a weekly ritual. Each time they sat by the window, sharing stories and laughter, they noticed how even the familiar faces around them seemed to smile a bit more, nodding in recognition of the bond they shared. One afternoon, as they finished their coffee, Eleanor looked out the window at the bustling street. You know, she mused, life has a funny way of teaching us lessons when we least expect it. Tom nodded, his gaze following hers. Yeah, and sometimes, it just takes one moment, one person, to change how we see the world. Eleanor turned back to him, her eyes soft. I'm glad that person was you. Tom squeezed her hand gently, a silent promise that no matter where life took them, the values she had instilled in him would always guide his path. And so, while the world outside rushed on, Tom and Eleanor knew they had already found something far more precious than anything Lancaster and Hayes could ever sell, a reminder that the true worth of a person, much like the finest jewel, shines brightest from within. Weeks turned into months, and the story of Eleanor Carter and her son, Tom Cruise, became more than just an anecdote shared in hushed tones among the wealthy patrons of Fifth Avenue. It became a symbol of humility and respect in circles that often forgot their importance. Lancaster and Hayes fine jewelry experienced a quiet transformation. Customers returned, not just for the sparkling diamonds or rare gemstones, but for the warmth and authenticity that had begun to define the store. Oliver, now a senior associate, led by example, ensuring that every person who walked through those grand glass doors felt valued, regardless of their attire or perceived status. One crisp autumn morning, as the golden leaves tumbled down onto the bustling streets, Nathan returned to the boutique. His time away had changed him. Gone was the sharp, dismissive air he once carried, in its place was a quieter, more reflective demeanor. He stepped into the store with measured steps, uncertain of how he'd be received. Oliver noticed him first. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, neither spoke. Then, Oliver offered a small nod, not of full forgiveness, but of acknowledgement. A step toward understanding. Mr. Collins emerged from his office shortly after, his expression unreadable. He approached Nathan, who stood straighter but kept his gaze humble. Well, Nathan, Mr. Collins said after a beat, let's see if you've really learned what this job is about. Nathan didn't expect a warm welcome or immediate redemption, but he was ready to prove himself through actions rather than words. Sometimes, the road back wasn't easy, but it was worth traveling if it led to genuine growth across the city. Tom Cruise's career continued to thrive, but his most cherished moments were those spent away from the spotlight. Every week, without fail, he and Eleanor visited their favorite cafe. The simple routine grounded him, reminding him of the values that fame and fortune could never replace. One day, as they sat by the window, a young man approached their table, his hands slightly trembling as he clutched a small notebook. Excuse me, Mr. Cruise, he began, his voice tentative. I just wanted to say, I was there that day at the jewelry store. I saw what happened. It really changed how I see people and how I treat them. Tom looked up, a gentle smile spreading across his face. He gestured to the empty chair beside them. Have a seat, he said warmly. Tell us your story. The young man sat down, his nerves easing in the presence of Tom's and Eleanor's welcoming smiles. As they listened, Eleanor felt her heart swell with quiet pride. It wasn't just about that one moment in the boutique, it was about the ripple effect, the way a single act of kindness or standing up against injustice could inspire others to do the same. Back at Lancaster and Hayes, the boutique had found its rhythm again, but with a renewed spirit. Customers came and went, but the essence of what had changed remained palpable. The wealthy couple who had once witnessed Nathan's arrogance returned one day, not to buy, but to thank Oliver for the lesson they hadn't realized they needed. And as for Nathan, he slowly rebuilt his reputation, not through charm, but through sincere effort and humility. He learned to listen more, to judge less, and to appreciate the stories behind every customer, no matter how they appeared. Years later, on a particularly sunny afternoon, Eleanor Carter walked past Lancaster and Hayes once more. She paused at the window, admiring a simple, elegant sapphire necklace displayed under the soft glow of the showroom lights. She smiled, not at the jewelry, but at the memory of how one day, a single encounter had changed so many lives. She didn't step inside this time. There was no need. She had already found the most valuable treasures life could offer: respect, dignity, and the unwavering